Anyways, let's move on to.
Do you want to talk about the world, the flesh, and the devil at all?
Yeah, let's do the world, the flesh, and the devil. So so you watched this a couple weeks ago, and you put it on the list for me. I've been meaning to watch it. I just, there's so many things to watch. And this stars Harry Belafonte, which I've seen in
Black Klansman.
Black Klansman. But also I've seen it in a noir film that I'm now forgetting the name, which is like No Way Out or something. I'll look it up in a sec. And then two actors whose names I've forgotten. Spoilers for the world, the flesh.
One is Mel Ferrer, who's in a weird reverse sexism seems to be most famous for having been Audrey Hepburn's first husband. Although he did a lot of acting. He is also in Lily, which is why I remember.
Got it.
Playing the abusive love interest that she ends up with at the end. So anyway.
Excellent. That's not this movie. So the world, the flesh, and the devil. So Harry Belafonte is, I think on Wikipedia it says he's a mine inspector, but he seems like an engineer. So maybe, it's not like his black story is completely fleshed out, but he's some kind of inspector / engineer. He's definitely somebody who knows how wires work.
Yeah.
And so he's inspecting a mine, and there's a cave in, and he doesn't die. He's knocked over, and he falls down, gets up, calls into the to above ground, and is like, "Hey, I'm stuck here," and like he can't hear them, but they're knocking on a pipe, and he can hear them knocking on the pipe, and then he starts to hear them work, and they're working, and he says, it's been 5 days and I'm still stuck here. And then he stops hearing them work, and that freaks him out. So he's like, oh, okay, well, why did they stop? Why'd you guys stop? And he's like trying to reach them. And then it doesn't really say how long it takes him. I assume it takes him more than the few minutes we see on screen, but he digs himself out the last little way that they hadn't quite got to. He doesn't see anybody in the mine. He's confused. He gets out to the mine site, and there's nobody there. And then he starts going out into the city, and there is nobody there, and he has no clue what's going on, but everybody's gone. And so this is a post-apocalyptic, ostensibly it's a nuclear post-apocalyptic movie, though that doesn't factor in terribly, sci-fi-ish movie. And he makes his way to, I think, New York.
Yes, there's some great late 50s New York shots in it. And
I'm impressed I want to immediately say that I know that it was an earlier era in the 50s. I think it's like 55 or something, or 59.
59.
59 that this movie comes out.
I just looked it up. Yeah.
And man, even then it must have been really difficult to get all those empty streets, and they must have been filming in the early hours of the morning.
I'm pretty sure that's how they always do it.
Yeah. That was our guest for the Night of the Comet too. But so I really enjoyed this movie. It is a low budget movie of that era. It's like right before the studios start falling apart. I almost wonder if it came out a few years later, if maybe it wouldn't have had just a little more money and a little more ability. And it's black and white. I don't, for whatever reason. And
we do not need to justify why they shot it in black and white. I don't
know why I said that. We're all good. And so it's low budget, and it's a great movie, and there's this one shot where like they're standing and then they move around and they're back to standing, and it's like, whoa, that's really jarring. And it's that kind of movie where it's missing those little bits, like probably they couldn't reshoot it, or that's just what they had, and whatever. And there's those moments, but then there's all this really complicated stuff about race. The movie is about race, right? That's right.
Well, do you want to explain why?
Well, so Belafonte, eventually, he starts fixing up this apartment that he's decided to live in. And
there's some great humor in some of that stuff, too.
Yes. Well, he starts talking to himself because, why not? There's nobody else there. And he's really good with wires, and it's pretty neat. And he eventually, he takes these mannequins, store mannequins, and he makes them his friends. And one of them starts to bother him, and it's this, like, white, good
they're
boy.
very, very 50s white, like suburban looking, like stereotypical mannequins. Yeah.
I forget what he calls it. He gives it a name.
Yeah.
And then he takes it out and he gets annoyed with it because it's like laughing at him or something. So he takes it out and he throws it over the side of the building, and it lands, and we hear a scream. Now, we know that there's been this woman watching him, and this woman has run out because he thinks it's him who's jumped, which is a certain kind of absurd humor.
Yes.
And so this woman is a young white woman. I don't know how old Belafonte was. He must have been in his like 40s or something, maybe.
I think he was younger than that.
Was he younger than that? Maybe he was younger.
I will look it up.
Look it up. And so we've got this young white girl and this young black man in 1959 post-apocalyptic New York.
He was 32 when it came out.
Okay, I guess that makes more sense. And so those are our two characters. It is going to be about race, obviously, but like it is so complicated to me. Like it's weird because I put this in my post, which I don't think I've released yet, where it's like it always matters what gestures you make and what the dialogue is and whatever, but when there are only two characters, everything is heightened. And so I'm watching it and I'm like, what did he mean by that? And what did that mean? And like
something I didn't even tell you, I wasn't even thinking about. She says to him at one point, I'm young, I'm white, I'm free, and I'm 21, or something like that. I'm free, I'm white, and 21, which he takes issue with. I had heard Ruby Keeler say that in one of the Busby Berkeley films. At one point she said, I'm right, I'm free, I'm 21, or something like that. And I was like, what is this? Like, now I've heard more than one person say this. It is a whole thing. It was something people said. It had to do with it was a racist thing. It had to do with being privileged, but not in the way you can acknowledge privilege now and whether or not it gets acknowledged so on. But it was like, I can do whatever I want because I'm young and I'm white, basically.
Huh.
And
that is not a thing I knew.
I know. I kind of there's not a lot on this movie out there, but I kind of want to find a few links and send them to you, and you maybe could even, we could put them somewhere. But one of them talks about that because he later brings it up with her. He's like, you just threw it out there like that meant nothing, but that is like a symbol of not a symbol, but like an oppressive statement to me.
Yeah.
And it was,
Yeah, and it's like, that's fascinating. And then as things goes along, again, spoilers for this, our young and white and free character gets, she's attracted to Harry Belafonte. He's a handsome man and he's good
really
at things.
Smart. He's really he's good at everything.
He's not quite the Sidney Poitier perfect black male that Sidney would tend to play in movies, but he is really scrappy. It's almost like he's scrappy, and he like knows how to do all these useful things, and he's really intelligent. And it's like that. It's slightly different, but it's a similar thing. And like he, meanwhile, is like not interested. But like, there's an interesting thing to me where it's like, I don't. It's a question of, is it like a self-hatred or is it a deep mistrust? Is it both? Because there's this thing where I think of it in terms of LGBTQIA culture, where like it's you think of like the stereotypical, and I don't know, maybe it's even a bad thing now, I don't know, but like a flamboyant gay person, like I'm not sure if that's what I'm supposed to say about it, but you think about somebody who's really outspoken about being gay or really outspoken about being black, and it's like that's almost in defiance of the self-hatred you're supposed to have, because culture has taught you to be self-hatred. And so I almost wonder if Harry Belafonte doesn't represent that kind of self-hatred that these outspoken, if you're an outspoken minority, like if that's what you're fighting against. I'm obviously not a minority, so I don't know, but this is just my thinking on it. But there's also like a deep mistrust of her because of these things.
Well, and that's what I wanted to talk about, because I think, and we can talk about this forever probably, so we shouldn't, but at the time this film was made, his production company, Harry Belafonte's production company, was involved. He could still not touch the woman actress, Inger Stevens, or there was a limit on how much touching they could do because he is black and she is white,
right?
Which is pretty gross.
Yes.
But I do think it leads to that interesting hair cutting scene where she asked him to cut her hair, and it's just kind of a disaster. But there's something really interesting about that scene, and it's upsetting to know why it came about, but it's so good. But I also wonder if that kind of burden of the Hays Code that still existed, and just what could and couldn't get made at the time, led to this weird situation where he is the one who won't get involved with her because of race.
Yeah.
It's kind of presented like she gets over it pretty quickly, and he is the one burdened by racism, which might not be how I would have gone about it. Like, I don't even know what to say about that. I think the interesting implication is that it has such repercussions that even after everyone is gone on the planet, he is still uncomfortable with her attraction to him because...
Well, yeah, nobody's looking. There isn't anyone to judge them. I mean, he can barely get someone on the radio, and yes, a third character shows up, but we'll get to that. But like, no one's looking. But I have a thought on that, which is like, there's this whole thing about, white privilege and how if you have white privilege, like, you don't notice all the racism necessarily. Now, depending on when, which school you went to, who your friends are and all that, like, there's complexities here. But like, I almost think that's, I don't know if white critics at the time, or if even the filmmakers, I assume Belafonte was thinking of this, and anybody black may have been thinking about this, but like, that's a kind of white privilege where she feels like, oh, I'm young and white and free, and so none of that matters. I can just do what I want. And Belafonte realizes that this is she's using her privilege to be like, oh no, I want you. And is like, is it almost Belafonte's character being like, no, I don't want it because I want to assert my own independence and my own feelings here.
Yeah.
And also maybe he just doesn't like her. He seems to like her, but like, so it's like, that's
I think he does like her.
And so that's an aspect to it where it's like, I think that part is kind of, and again, I don't, I think there is a little wonkiness in some of how it's handling race too, but like, I feel like that could also be discussed about as a white privilege thing.
Right. I think what I was trying to say earlier is I don't think the real pressing issue in the 50s and 60s was that black people held on to racism. Like, I don't think that was the urgent issue of the time, but because of whatever mechanics were involved in what they could and couldn't do with the film, it did create what you're talking about, is this interesting effect wherein she gets to immediately get rid of all the damaging effects of racism while he's like still feeling it in a way that she isn't.
Yeah, no, I think that's interesting. Yeah,
I wonder, without all the stipulations that might have been there at the time, what Harry Belafonte might have wanted to make the movie. Now, the interesting, you mentioned not knowing, I did more than a 5-minute internet search, and I can go through and find some of the stuff because there's not a lot on it.
Yeah, send it to me. I want to read it, and we can put it in the link
below. I told our father I had watched it, and he was like, really? I have been talking about this movie since, because our father's a Harry Belafonte fan. So he saw it sometime around when it came out. I'm not sure he saw it in the theater, but he had seen it ages ago. And he said whenever he brought it up, people had no idea what he was talking about, which I think is a shame, because not only is it interesting race relation stuff, but 1959, an apocalyptic film where a guy is the only man on Earth. Like, I'm sure it's not the first, but this is right around when the Twilight Zone. Like, I think it has interesting things there. But from what I could find was a lot of very strange, it's good, but it loses the sci-fi angle in the second half. And I'm like,
really?
I mean, the sci-fi angle was never the point, honestly. Like, it's interesting.
Yeah, it's a sci-fi movie, but it's, as you say, sometimes I think sci-fi is a genre, but sometimes people think of it as a setting.
Yeah.
And in this movie, it really is more of a setting than anything.
Yeah. So, so it looks to me like critics were kind of dismissed it because they're like, it's not really a sci-fi film. And I'm like, are you missing the point? Like,
yeah, that's interesting. Well, then, okay, so.
And I even read that Harry Belafonte was not satisfied with it, but that may have to do with what he wasn't able to do as far as exposing racism with it. So
I could believe that, and I'd be curious if there's any interviews with him about it. I'll have to.
Yeah, again, I just read what I could on the internet, and there was not that much.
Well, and there's, so the last thing, just real quick to cover on this, is a third man shows up, a white man shows up. He's on a boat, and so somehow he must have missed the fallout or whatever. It's never explained, it doesn't matter. And they nurse him back to health. And this then begins a division where this man is trying to get with the only woman available, because there's an aspect to the movie that is also interested in, I think, like base human emotion, where it's like they want sex, they want intimacy, they want companionship. And like, so this guy, who I think in one scene he says he doesn't really care that Belafonte is black, but I think that's kind of like, that's like one of those like, oh, right, you don't care that he's black.
Like he has a black friend, kind of doesn't care.
Yeah, and it's like, okay, that's not, I don't think that's how that works. Anyways, and so this guy's like, no, we have to kill her. One of us is going to have to kill the other person to get with her, because Belafonte is sort of grappling, and he's like, I do like her, and there's all that. And maybe it's a little bit weaker than some of the race stuff that's going on, but like there's essentially this scene where in the streets of Manhattan, I guess, where there's no one, they're wandering around with guns shooting at each other. And again, really early hours of the morning, this looks like it must have been very bizarre to shoot. And I kind of like that at the end of it, Belafonte's like, no, I'm not going to do this because this is dumb. This doesn't matter. It is the black man who has to be the better man, which is a bit of a trope. And I'm not in love with the trope, but it works here anyways, whatever. And I kind of like that they all walk away hand in hand. You know, the point being that they kind of work their shit out. And it's kind of weirdly hopeful, kind of, for what the film has been. Not that the film is like super dour, but it's like the film feels like it's kind of going towards a negative place.
Right.
And it ends up being weirdly hopeful. So I kind of like that.
Well, and you're not getting into that there's a ton of gender politics there, where she is just about losing her goddamn mind, because she's like, I want this guy. This guy is conflicted because of racism, and I'm young, white, and free and really don't understand. This guy thinks he just gets to now they think they get to decide who gets to have me.
Right, like where it's like Belafonte is black, so there's all this racism, but he has more choice and options, and what's the word I'm looking for?
Agency?
Agency. He has more agency to choose things, whereas our young woman doesn't really have any agency once the second guy shows up. And
in her romantic relationships, yes.
Yeah. But she is white, so she doesn't really get the racism. So like there's this interesting like sexism, racism, like so it's like this is a movie that I think is worthy of like a deeper dive, and like
I know I'm really bummed that it's not better known, because I not because I think it's a masterpiece like Beverly Hills Cop, but because I think it's interesting, and I wish more people would comment on it.
Yeah, it's not a masterpiece. It is unfortunately a victim of its own, lack of money, I'm sure, lack of, that stuff. But like it is a really great film. It's a great film. I recommend it to everybody. It's great.
Yeah, and I definitely, it makes me want to see more earlier Harry Belafonte films. And later too, frankly, but I'm definitely curious about some of his earlier stuff.